Crimea was once Russia's biggest advantage. Now it may be its biggest burden. Supply lines are under pressure. Logistics are stretched thin. Military costs are rising fast. Civilian stress is growing quietly. And global attention is back on one place: Crimea. So the question is simple. Is Crimea turning into Russia's biggest strategic mistake? Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we are discussing a question that is quietly reshaping the Ukraine-Russia war. Is Crimea still a strategic asset for Moscow? Or is it slowly becoming a long-term liability? For years, Crimea symbolized control, power, and access to the Black Sea. It was presented as a permanent gain, a decisive move. But wars change conditions, and strategies that once worked can turn costly over time. Maintaining Crimea now requires constant military presence. It demands fuel supplies, equipment rotations, and protection of transport routes. Every convoy matters. Every supply delay creates pressure. At the same time, Ukraine has shifted tactics. Instead of direct assaults, the focus is increasingly on logistics, infrastructure, and sustainability. This changes the equation completely. Crimea is no longer just territory. It is a system that must be fed, defended, and maintained daily. International attention has also returned. Every development is monitored. Every disruption is analyzed. This creates diplomatic costs as well. In this video, we will break down why Crimea's value is being questioned, what strategic strain really means, and why some analysts believe this region may now be working against Russia's broader war goals. Stay with us as we explain this step by step. To understand the current situation, we must first understand why Crimea mattered so much. Crimea offered Russia naval access, warm water ports, and regional influence. It also carried symbolic value. Control over Crimea was portrayed as irreversible. But symbolism does not move fuel trucks, and symbolism does not protect supply routes. Modern warfare depends heavily on logistics, fuel, ammunition, spare parts, and rotation of forces. Crimea is geographically isolated. It relies on a limited number of routes for supplies. Any disruption creates immediate ripple effects. Even small delays force adjustments. Convoys must travel longer distances. Security costs increase. Resources are diverted from other fronts. This creates opportunity costs. Every unit protecting Crimea is a unit not deployed elsewhere. Meanwhile, Ukraine has shown patience. Instead of rushing, it has applied pressure gradually, targeting sustainability rather than spectacle. This approach forces Russia to spend more over time, financially, militarily, politically. International observers notice this shift. They see a long game being played. Crimea becomes less about expansion and more about endurance. That raises a serious question. How long can this level of commitment be maintained? At what cost? And does holding Crimea still offer strategic returns that justify those costs today? Another key factor is civilian impact. Wars are not fought only by armies. They affect daily life. In Crimea, civilians depend on stable fuel, food, and transportation. When supply pressure increases, civilian stress follows. This does not always make headlines, but it matters. Maintaining normal life requires resources. Electricity, transport, and essential services depend on logistics. Any strain creates dissatisfaction. That dissatisfaction requires management, more security, more administration, more spending. This adds another layer of burden. At the same time, Russia must project stability. Control is not only military, it is psychological. If daily life becomes difficult, the narrative weakens. Ukraine understands this dynamic well. By focusing on pressure points, it avoids direct confrontation. Instead, it creates slow accumulating costs. These costs are hard to explain away. They do not look dramatic, but they drain resources steadily. International media also watches civilian conditions closely. Every report shapes perception. Perception influences diplomacy. That influences long-term outcomes. Crimea therefore becomes more than a military issue. It becomes a governance challenge, a supply challenge, and a messaging challenge. Each of these demands attention. Together they raise the cost of holding the region year after year. Logistics remains the core of this discussion. Military history shows one clear lesson. Armies fail when supply chains fail. Crimea's geography creates natural limitations. There are only a few main access points. Protecting them requires constant effort. Every bridge, road, and route becomes critical. This forces defensive planning. Defensive planning consumes resources. Fuel must be allocated not only for operations, but for protection, air defense, patrols, repairs. This compounds costs. Ukraine's approach increases uncertainty. Even the possibility of disruption forces precautions. Precautions cost money. They also slow movement. Slower movement reduces flexibility. Flexibility is crucial in modern war. As flexibility decreases, operational options shrink. Crimea then limits strategic freedom instead of expanding it. This is the opposite of its original purpose. Meanwhile, Russia must balance multiple fronts. Every decision involves trade-offs. Strengthening Crimea may weaken another area. This balancing act becomes harder over time, especially as external pressure continues. Crimea's strategic value, therefore, depends on sustainability, not symbolism, not past decisions, only current realities. Those realities are increasingly complex, and complexity often favors the side applying pressure patiently rather than the side reacting constantly. International consequences also play a role. Crimea remains a focal point in global discussions. Every development attracts statements, reactions, and analysis. This keeps diplomatic pressure alive. Sanctions debates frequently reference Crimea. Negotiations cannot ignore it. This creates long-term diplomatic costs. Holding Crimea is not a static decision. It requires continuous political justification. Allies and partners ask questions. Resources must be allocated to defend the position internationally. This includes messaging diplomacy and narrative control. At the same time, global fatigue with prolonged conflicts grows. As wars drag on, attention shifts, but Crimea repeatedly pulls focus back. This prevents de-escalation. It locks positions in place. Ukraine leverages this dynamic. By keeping Crimea relevant, it ensures continued scrutiny. Continued scrutiny limits flexibility. Every option is weighed against international response. That restricts maneuvering room. For Russia, this means fewer diplomatic exits, fewer compromise paths, and higher stakes for every move. Crimea therefore influences not only military planning, but global positioning. Its value must be measured against these accumulated costs. When costs rise faster than benefits, strategic logic demands reevaluation. That is why analysts increasingly frame Crimea not as a prize, but as a persistent strategic challenge with no easy resolution. Another issue is time. Time favors preparation. Time exposes weaknesses. The longer a position must be held, the more stress it experiences. Crimea has entered this phase. Initial gains are long past. Now comes maintenance. Maintenance is expensive. It requires predictability. War rarely offers predictability. Ukraine's adaptive tactics ensure constant uncertainty. Uncertainty forces over-preparation. Over-preparation drains resources. This cycle repeats, month after month, year after year. Public expectations also change. What was once seen as strength may later appear as stubbornness. This affects domestic narratives. Explaining ongoing costs becomes harder, especially without visible progress. Crimea does not offer expansion anymore. It offers defense. Defense is less inspiring politically, yet it demands equal effort. Meanwhile, technological changes favor precision and disruption. Small actions can have large effects. This increases the risk profile. Every incident draws attention. Every response must be calibrated. The margin for error shrinks. Crimea thus becomes a strategic obligation rather than an opportunity. Obligations restrict choices. They limit innovation. And they consume focus. In complex wars, focus is a finite resource. Losing it in one place can signal vulnerability elsewhere. Economic strain cannot be ignored. Wars are ultimately funded by economies. Maintaining Crimea requires steady investment, infrastructure repairs, security systems, administrative costs, transport subsidies. All of this adds up. At the same time, sanctions pressure remains. Access to resources is limited. Efficiency becomes crucial. Crimea challenges efficiency. Its isolation increases costs. Its security needs divert funding. Opportunity costs grow. Money spent maintaining Crimea cannot be spent modernizing elsewhere. This slows adaptation. Ukraine benefits indirectly from this imbalance. By forcing resource allocation, it shapes long-term outcomes. Economic pressure is slow but persistent. It does not produce dramatic headlines, but it shapes decisions. Over time, budgets reveal priorities, and priorities reveal strategy. If Crimea consumes disproportionate resources, it signals strain. Markets notice. Partners notice. Domestic institutions notice. This feedback loop matters. Strategic mistakes are rarely single events. They are prolonged miscalculations. Crimea risks becoming one of those, not because it was wrong initially, but because conditions evolved. Strategies that do not evolve with conditions become liabilities. This is the core argument analysts now explore. From Ukraine's perspective, the approach is calculated. Pressure without escalation. Cost without spectacle. By avoiding large-scale assaults, Ukraine minimizes risk. Instead, it maximizes strain. This asymmetry favors patience. Crimea is ideal for this approach. Its dependence on logistics creates leverage. Every disruption matters. Even symbolic disruptions force responses. Responses cost resources. This shapes behavior. Russia must remain reactive. Reaction is inherently disadvantageous. It seeds initiative. Initiative defines momentum. Momentum shapes narratives. Narratives influence allies. This chain reaction extends beyond the battlefield. Crimea sits at the center of it. As pressure continues, decisions become harder. Withdrawals appear weak. Staying becomes expensive. This is the classic strategic trap. Neither option offers easy benefits, only varying degrees of loss. That is why analysts call it a potential mistake. Not because of intent, but because of outcome. Strategic mistakes are judged by consequences, not motivations. If Crimea continues to absorb resources, limit options, and increase exposure, its original strategic logic weakens. This does not determine the future, but it frames the debate clearly. The future of Crimea depends on adaptation. Strategies can change, policies can shift, but adaptation requires acknowledgement. Acknowledging strain is difficult, especially in prolonged conflicts. Leadership narratives often lag behind realities. This creates tension. Crimea sits at this intersection, between narrative and necessity, between symbolism and sustainability. Military planners must weigh every factor. Diplomats must manage perception. Economists must track costs. All these perspectives converge. When they align, strategic reassessment follows. This does not mean immediate change. It means gradual recalibration. Ukraine's pressure accelerates this process by forcing continuous evaluation. Every month becomes a test. Every incident adds data. Over time, patterns emerge. Patterns inform decisions. Crimea's pattern increasingly shows rising cost curves, rising risk exposure, and declining strategic flexibility. That combination defines a liability, not a victory. The outcome is not predetermined, but the trajectory raises serious questions. Those questions shape global discussion. They influence planning rooms, and they guide future moves. That is why Crimea remains central, not as a symbol, but as a strategic calculation under constant review. In conclusion, the question is not emotional. It is analytical. Is Crimea still delivering strategic value, or is it extracting growing costs? Evidence suggests the balance is shifting. Logistics strain, economic pressure, civilian impact, diplomatic consequences, and long-term sustainability all matter. Crimea now demands constant attention, constant defense, and constant justification. These demands limit flexibility. They shape broader war strategy. This is why many analysts describe Crimea as a potential strategic mistake. Not because of the past, but because of present realities. Wars evolve. Strategies must evolve with them. Failure to adapt transforms assets into liabilities. The coming months will reveal more. Pressure will continue. Costs will accumulate. Decisions will become harder. Whatever the outcome, Crimea will remain a key factor, not only in military terms, but in political and economic calculations as well. If you found this analysis useful, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel for more clear breakdowns, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think Crimea is still an advantage, or has it become a strategic burden? Your opinion matters.